The first tear slipped down Grace Miller's cheek before the church bells finished ringing. It rolled slowly beneath the soft veil pinned into her brown curls, catching on the edge of her trembling smile. Because some foolish part of her still thought Evan might come running through the doors. He would be breathless. He would be sorry. He would say there had been traffic, or nerves, or some terrible misunderstanding. But the double doors stayed shut. The aisle remained empty, and 300 people watched a curvy schoolteacher in a lace wedding dress slowly understand that the man she loved had not been delayed. He had chosen not to come. Whispers moved through St. Two. Aurelius Cathedral, like smoke. She looks like she's going to faint. Didn't he leave with the maid of honor? Someone said they saw them getting into a car together. Phones lifted. Tiny cameras glowed in the dark wooden pews. Grace heard one woman laugh softly behind a bouquet of white roses. Her hands clenched around the bridal flowers until the stems snapped. At the altar, Father Callahan looked at her with gentle pity. Pity was worse than cruelty. Cruelty at least had a shape. Pity seeped into the skin and made a person feel smaller. Grace, he whispered. We can stop. She could barely breathe. Her mother was crying in the front pew. Her father sat frozen beside her, jaw tight, eyes shining with the helpless rage of a man who could not punch heartbreak in the face. Grace turned toward the guests, toward the raised phones, toward the cousins, co-workers, neighbors, donors, and wealthy acquaintances Evan had insisted on inviting, because a wedding should make a statement. Apparently, it had. Just not the one Grace expected. Then a message lit up on the phone in her hand. It was from Evan. I'm sorry. I can't marry you. I can't marry you. I can't marry you. Don't look for me. Under it. A second message arrived from her maid of honor. Tessa. A photo. Evan's hand on Tessa's thigh in the back seat of a black town car. Grace stared at the image until the world blurred. The bouquet fell from her hands. A few guests gasped. Someone in the back laughed again. That laugh broke something in her. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Grace Miller did not scream. She had spent years teaching frightened children how to breathe through panic, how to count slowly, how to survive the moment before tears became sobs. So she lowered herself onto the altar steps. The church was cold beneath her. Her veil slipped over one shoulder. Her dress pooled around her like spilled moonlight. And for one terrible second, she was no longer a bride. She was a spectacle. A woman everyone would replay later over coffee, wine, and cruel little group chats. Then a man stood in the back pew. The laughter died first. Then the whispers. Then the clicking of phone cameras faded one by one, as if the entire cathedral had remembered how to be afraid. Grace looked up through wet lashes. Vincent Romano walked down the aisle slowly. He wore a black tailored suit, no tie, and a long charcoal overcoat that made him look less like a wedding guest and more like a warning. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, a faint scar cutting through one eyebrow. His hands were bare, but the men standing behind him were not the kind of men who needed weapons visible to be dangerous. Grace knew his name because everyone in Boston knew his name. Vincent Romano. The man businessmen lowered their voices around. The man politicians pretended not to know. The man whose family name was spoken with respect in restaurants, courtrooms, police stations, and private clubs where rich men made dirty decisions beneath crystal chandeliers. He had come to the wedding only because Evan's uncle was tied to some private family obligation no one discussed in polite company. Vincent Romano had not smiled once during the ceremony. Now he stopped in front of Grace. The whole church held its breath. He looked down at her ruined face, her shaking hands, the phone lying screen up beside her. He did not offer pity. That was the first thing she noticed. His expression was cold enough to cut glass. but his eyes held on to her like they had found something unexpected in a burning room. Then Vincent Romano sat beside her on the altar steps. A low shock moved through the church. Grace stared at him. Too stunned to speak, he leaned forward, rested his elbows on his knees, and looked at Father Callahan. Do not close the ceremony yet. Father Callahan blinked. Mr. Romano. Vincent did not raise his voice. He didn't have to. I said not yet. Grace's lips parted. What are you doing? Vincent turned his head toward her. Up close. He smelled faintly of rain, expensive leather, and smoke. His presence was terrifying, not because he moved like a violent man, but because he moved like violence had learned patience. Saving your life, he said quietly. Grace almost laughed through the pain. My life. His eyes dropped to the phone on the step beside her. The photo of Evan and Tessa still glowed on the screen. No man runs from a wedding like this unless he is a coward, Vincent said, or unless someone paid him enough to disappear. Grace's blood went cold. At the back of the church, one of Vincent's men stepped inside from the rain. He bent and whispered something to another guard. Vincent's jaw tightened. Then the cathedral doors burst open. Not with Evan. With 3 black SUVs screeching to a stop outside beneath the storm, the sound rolled into the church like thunder. Guests turned. Someone screamed. Vincent stood. The warm softness of the wedding vanished in an instant. His men moved down the side aisles. Grace grabbed the edge of the altar. Heart hammering. What's happening? Vincent looked at her then. And for the first time, she saw something dangerous beneath the control. Not fear, recognition. Your groom didn't just leave you, he said. He sold you. Before Grace could answer, the stained glass window above the choir loft exploded inward. People screamed and dropped to the floor. Vincent's arm came around Grace's waist, and he dragged her behind the altar just as a shot cracked through the cathedral air. Her veil tore. Her knees hit the marble. His body covered hers. And while everyone else cried out in panic, Vincent Romano leaned close to her ear and said, almost calmly, do exactly what I tell you. Grace Miller, and you might survive your wedding day. The next 30 seconds happened in flashes. White roses crushed beneath running feet. A bridesmaid sobbing under a pew. Father Callahan clutching the gold cross at his neck. Vincent's men forming a wall near the center aisle. Grace's father shouting her name. And Vincent's hand locked around her wrist as he pulled her through a narrow side door behind the altar. She stumbled in her wedding heels. Wait, my parents. My men have them. You don't know that? He stopped so abruptly, she nearly collided with him. The hallway behind the sacristy was dim, lit by a single yellow bulb. Rain hammered against the old stone windows. Vincent turned toward her, and his voice dropped into something sharp and controlled. I know every exit in this church. I know every man who came in armed. I know which guests are innocent, which ones are lying, and which ones were waiting for you to be alone before they moved. If you want to live long enough to ask questions, you will walk. Grace hated that she believed him. She hated even more that his hand around her wrist felt like the only solid thing left in the world. They moved through the back corridor into an old rectory kitchen. 2 of Vincent's men opened a service door into the rain. A black SUV waited outside. Grace stopped on the threshold. The city had become a blur of stormwater. Flashing headlights and church bells clanging wildly overhead. This is insane, she whispered. I'm a teacher. I teach 4th grade. I grade spelling tests. I buy stickers from the dollar store. People don't shoot at me. Vincent looked at her soaked veil, her shaking mouth, the mascara streaking down her cheeks. No, he said. They shoot at what you inherited. I didn't inherit anything. That's what they were counting on. Before she could pull away, Someone shouted from the alley. A man in a gray suit raised a gun. Vincent moved faster than thought. He shoved Grace behind him, drew a weapon from beneath his coat, and fired once. The man dropped out of sight. Grace screamed. Vincent turned back as if nothing had happened. "Get in the car." She stared at him. Horrified, he stepped closer. Rain darkening his hair. "Grace. My parents, already in another vehicle. My students, my school, my life. Your life changed the second your groom sent that message." She slapped him. The sound cracked between them louder than the storm. One of his men shifted, stunned. Vincent did not move. His face turned slightly with the force, then slowly came back to her. Grace's palm burned. Her voice shook. "Do not talk to me like I belong to you." For a long moment, Vincent only looked at her. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. Not anger, not softness, interest. Then he leaned close enough for her to feel the heat of him through the rain. "If you belong to me," he said quietly. No one in that church would have dared laugh. Grace's breath caught. He opened the SUV door. This time, she got in. The vehicle tore away from the church as the bells kept ringing behind them. Boston passed in silver streaks beyond the tinted windows. Rain slid over the glass like the city itself was melting. Grace sat wrapped in Vincent's coat, her wedding dress swallowing the back seat. Her hands clenched so tightly that her nails left marks in her palms. Across from her, Vincent spoke into a phone in a low voice. "Finned Hart. Find the maid of honor. Lock down Logan. South Station. Every private airstrip within 60 miles. I want traffic cameras, hotel cameras, toll booths, gas station. If Evan Hart breathes under a roof in this city, I want to know which room." Grace stared at him. Evan Hart. The name hurt even inside someone else's mouth. Vincent ended the call. "Where are my parents safe? I want to speak to them." "You will. Now." "No." Her eyes narrowed. "You're not my husband." A muscle moved in his jaw. "No," he said. "Your husband ran." The words hit harder than they should have. Grace looked away quickly, but he saw the wound land. Silence filled the car. Then Vincent said, "Quieter." "That was cruel." Grace swallowed. "Yes. I do not apologize often." "Then don't." His gaze stayed on her. "I am sorry." She turned back despite herself. Vincent Romano apologizing sounded almost unnatural, like thunder asking permission to enter a room. The SUV passed through a security gate into an underground garage beneath a luxury building on the waterfront. Concrete pillars gleamed under white lights. Men in black waited near a private elevator. Grace refused Vincent's hand when she stepped out. Her heel caught in the hem of her dress anyway. Before she could fall, Vincent caught her waist. For one breath, she was pressed against him. His hand was firm at her side. Not wandering, not gentle, exactly. Controlled. Grace looked up. He was too close. Rain clung to his lashes. His eyes dropped to her mouth for half a second before he let go. "Careful," he said. She stepped back. "I was fine. You were about to break your neck." "I would rather break my neck independently." For the first time, something almost like amusement touched his face. Almost. Noted. The penthouse was nothing like Grace expected. She thought a mafia boss would live somewhere cold and vulgar. All black marble and obvious wealth. Vincent's home was dark. Yes, but elegant. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the stormy harbor. Low lamps warmed the rooms in amber light. Shelves of old books lined one wall. A grand piano sat untouched near the windows. There were no family photos, no softness, no clutter. Nothing that suggested anyone waited for him when he came home. A woman in her 60s approached with a folded towel and a careful expression. Mr. Romano. Mrs. Bell. This is Grace Miller. She needs dry clothes. And privacy. Grace lifted her chin. I need my phone. Vincent looked at her. No. Excuse me, your phone is compromised. My phone is my phone. Your groom sent you bait from it. Grace's stomach twisted. Bait. The photo. He wanted you humiliated, distracted, alone. The words sank into her slowly. The photo of Evan and Tessa had not been a careless cruelty. It had been timed, designed. A little trap dressed as heartbreak. Grace gripped the back of a chair. Why? Vincent crossed the room to a side table and poured whiskey he did not drink. Because someone needed the ceremony interrupted before vows were completed. Grace blinked. Why would that matter? He turned. Glass in hand. Because your marriage would have triggered a legal transfer. She stared at him. My marriage to Evan, yes. I don't have money. No. But your name does. Grace laughed once. Empty and disbelieving. My name grades essays and pays rent. Vincent set the untouched glass down. Grace Miller was not your birth name. The room tilted. The city lights beyond the windows blurred. What did you say? He reached into his coat and removed a sealed cream envelope. The paper looked old, expensive, and deeply out of place in the middle of her ruined wedding day. This was delivered to me this morning by a man who died before he could explain why. Grace took one step back. No. Inside is a copy of a birth record, a trust agreement, and a photograph. He laid the envelope on the table between them. Grace did not touch it. For some reason, she was more afraid of that envelope than she had been of gunfire. Vincent watched her carefully. Your adoptive parents love you, he said. That much is obvious. Her throat tightened. They are my parents. Yes. The answer was immediate. No correction. No cruelty. Something in her chest cracked open a little. Vincent continued. But someone buried your original identity. And today, someone tried to make sure you never discovered why. Grace's voice came out small. What identity? Vincent's eyes did not leave hers. Belandi. The name meant nothing to her. Then, from somewhere in memory, she heard a whisper from childhood. A woman at a grocery store looking at her too long. An old man near the school parking lot, crossing himself when he heard her full name. Her mother crying once in the kitchen after a strange letter arrived. Grace pressed a hand to her stomach. What is Belandi? Vincent's expression hardened. A dead crime family. A fortune no one could find. And a little girl who disappeared 28 years ago. The room went silent. Grace shook her head. No, I'm not part of this. I'm not some missing mafia princess. I am a teacher. I have a classroom with paper stars on the ceiling. I know. You don't know me. No, Vincent said. But after today, I know this. Someone spent years keeping you ordinary because ordinary made you safe. Then Evan Hart found out what you were worth. Grace's knees weakened. She sat down before she fell. The wedding dress spread across Vincent Romano's expensive floor like a ghost. Mrs. Bell returned with tea and soft clothes, then disappeared as quietly as she came. Grace stared at the envelope. Did Evan know before today? Vincent's silence answered. A sob rose in her chest, but she swallowed it down. She would not fall apart in front of this man. Not again. I want to see my parents. You will. When the route is secure. I want to go home. No. You cannot keep me here. Vincent stepped closer. No, he said calmly. But I can tell you what waits outside. Reporters. Police who answer to the Hart family. Men from the Vescari organization who missed you at the church and will try again. And possibly your runaway groom. If he grows desperate enough to trade you himself. Grace stood too fast. Stop talking like I'm a package. His gaze sharpened. Then stop acting like danger becomes less real when you dislike the tone. Her breath caught. They stared at each other across the room. The storm flashed behind him. He was infuriating, terrifying. And the only person who seemed willing to tell her the truth without wrapping it in pity. Grace looked down at her wedding dress. I need out of this. Vincent nodded once. Mrs. Bell left clothes in the guest suite. Grace walked past him. At the hallway entrance. She stopped. Why were you at my wedding? For the first time. Vincent looked away. My mother made me promise to attend. Your mother knows Evan no. Then why? His face closed. Because the priest called her yesterday. He was worried. About what Vincent looked back at her. About the groom asking questions. No groom should ask about his bride's birth certificate. Grace slept for 3 hours and woke with a scream in her throat. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Then she saw the harbor windows. The dark silk sheets. The chair placed beneath the bedroom door handle from the inside because she trusted locks less than furniture now. Her wedding dress hung across a standing mirror like a body. Grace pressed both hands over her face. The room smelled faintly of lavender. Rain. And someone else, money. A soft knock came at the door. She froze. Grace, Vincent said from the other side. Your parents are here. She ran barefoot into the hall. Her mother was waiting in the penthouse living room. Wrapped in a borrowed coat. Eyes swollen from crying. Her father stood beside her. Face pale and furious. Grace crashed into them. For several minutes, there were no explanations. Only arms. Tears. Her mother's hands on her hair. Her father whispering, my girl, like a prayer. Vincent stood near the window and did not interrupt. When Grace finally pulled back, she saw guilt in her mother's face. The kind of guilt that had lived there for years. Grace went still. You knew. Her mother began to cry again. Her father closed his eyes. Grace stepped back. You knew something. Her father looked at Vincent. This is family business. Vincent's voice was calm. Not anymore. Grace turned on him. Don't too. His eyes softened by a fraction. But he said nothing. Her mother reached for Grace's hand. We were trying to protect you. From what? From who I am. From people who would kill you for it. Grace's anger faltered. Her mother sat on the couch. Trembling. You were 3 months old when we got you. Your birth mother came to us through Father Callahan. She was terrified. She said her husband's family had been wiped out. And the people who did it were looking for the child. She begged us to take you. To love you. To never tell anyone. Grace whispered. My birth mother. Her name was Elena Belandi. Vincent's gaze sharpened at the name. Grace noticed. Did you know her? Vincent was silent for a beat too long. No. It was the first lie Grace saw him tell. Her father continued. Voice rough. We raised you as ours because you were ours. Not by blood, but by every sleepless night, every fever, every first day of school. We didn't care about money. We didn't care about names. We cared about keeping you alive. Grace's anger broke into grief. Why didn't you tell me before the wedding? Her mother covered her mouth. Because Evan came to us 2 weeks ago. Grace went cold. What he said he knew. He said he loved you anyway. He said after the wedding. He could help protect you with his family connections. Vincent made a soft sound that was almost contempt. Grace looked at him. What Evan Hart has no connections strong enough to protect a goldfish. Her father's jaw tightened. We thought he was arrogant, not dangerous. He is both. Vincent said. Grace sat slowly. Her mother touched her arm. We wanted to tell you, but you were so happy. Sweetheart, you looked at him like he was proof life could finally be gentle. Grace closed her eyes. That was the cruelest truth of all. She had loved Evan not because he was extraordinary. She had loved him because he seemed safe. A charming accountant with soft hands and predictable habits. A man who brought her coffee on school mornings and kissed her forehead in front of her students. A man who called her beautiful on the days she felt too large for the delicate world around her. But now she wondered when his love had turned into calculation, or whether it had ever been love at all. Vincent's phone buzzed. He read the message. His face went still. What is it? Grace asked. He looked at her parents first. Then, at her. They found Tessa. Grace stood. Where? At a private clinic outside Providence. Why would she be at a clinic? Vincent hesitated. Grace's pulse kicked. Tell me. His voice was low. She is pregnant. The room dropped into silence. Grace stared at him. The words did not make sense at first. Then they did. And the pain arrived so cleanly that she almost admired it. Tessa. Her maid of honor. Her best friend since college. The woman who helped her choose the dress. Who held her hand during fittings. Who cried at the bridal shower. Who told Grace she had finally found someone who saw her. Pregnant. Grace sank back down. Evans Vincent said nothing. Her laugh came out broken. Of course. Her mother began to sob. Grace looked at the harbor window. At the storm clearing into a gray morning. What did I do to make everyone lie to me? Vincent moved then. Not too close. Just close enough that his shadow crossed the floor beside her. Grace. She looked up. His voice was softer than before. And somehow more dangerous. You did nothing. That is why they chose you. She hated that the words comforted her. She hated that he knew exactly what wound to press and which one to protect. 3 days later, Grace Miller's humiliation had become national entertainment. The video from the church spread across every platform. Curvy bride abandoned at the altar. Runaway groom leaves. Teacher for maid of honor. Mystery man sits beside, crying bride before cathedral shooting. People edited sad music under her tears. Strangers debated whether she had let herself go. Comment sections dissected her body. Her dress, her face, her worth. Some pitied her. Some mocked her. Some romanticized the moment Vincent sat beside her without understanding the violence that followed. Grace stopped reading after one woman wrote, "Maybe he left because he wanted someone smaller." She threw the phone across Vincent's guest suite. It hit the wall and cracked. A second later, the door opened. Vincent stood there. Grace glared. "Do you knock?" I heard something break. It was mine to break. His gaze moved to the phone on the floor. That phone was new. I'll add it to the list of things men have ruined this week. He looked at her for a moment. Then he walked in, picked up the phone, and placed it face down on the table. You should not read comments written by people, brave only in empty rooms. I know that. Then why do it? Because apparently I enjoy stabbing myself with strangers. Vincent's mouth tightened, but not in anger. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, wearing borrowed jeans and an oversized sweater Belle had found. Without the dress, without the veil, without the ceremony. She looked smaller somehow. Not physically. Grace was still curvy, soft, solid in the way she had spent years trying not to apologize for. But grief had made her younger. Vincent hated noticing that. He had not intended to notice anything about Grace Miller. When Father Callahan called his mother about a suspicious groom, Vincent had attended the wedding only as a precaution. He expected paperwork, perhaps blackmail, maybe a greedy fiancé trying to maneuver into an old Bellandi trust. He had not expected Grace sitting on altar steps with tears on her face and humiliation gathering around her like wolves. He had not expected the sharp slap in the rain. He had not expected to think about the shape of her grief long after leaving the room. Grace looked at him. Did you find Evan? No. Do you think he loves her? Tessa? Yes. Vincent's expression darkened. No. Do you know that? Or do you just assume all betrayal is practical? Both. Grace folded her hands in her lap. For a while, the penthouse was quiet, except for the distant hum of the city. Then she said, I need to go back to school. No. Her head snapped up. You can just keep saying no. I can when the alternative is reckless. My students saw that video. Vincent said nothing. Grace's voice trembled. They saw me crying. Some of them don't have stable homes. Some already believe people always leave. I need them to see me walk back into that classroom. Vincent watched her carefully. There it was again. That strange, stubborn light. Grace Miller had been abandoned, hunted, lied to, and publicly torn apart. Yet her first thought was not revenge. It was children with paper stars on a ceiling. No, he said again, but this time slower. Grace stood. I am not asking permission. Then you are misunderstanding your situation. And you are misunderstanding me. She stepped closer. Close enough that most men in Boston would have backed away from Vincent Romano instinctively. Grace did not. I may be scared. I may be heartbroken. I may be wearing another woman's sweater because my wedding dress is evidence in whatever nightmare this is. But I am not furniture you can move into a safe corner. Vincent's eyes held hers. The air changed. Not softer. Hotter. More dangerous. He looked at her mouth for half a second. Then away. You want to go to school? Yes. Fine. Grace blinked. Surprised by the victory, Vincent continued. You go with me. No. His brow lifted. You wanted compromise. I wanted freedom. That is not currently on the menu. She exhaled sharply. You impossible. I have been called worse. I believe that. Again. The almost smile. It disappeared quickly. But Grace saw it. And for reasons she refused to examine. It made her heart ache differently than Evan had. The next morning, 3 black SUVs stopped outside Hawthorne Academy. Rain had turned to snow overnight, dusting Boston in white. Children and parents paused on the sidewalk as Vincent Romano stepped out first in a black overcoat, followed by 2 men who scanned the street without pretending not to. Grace stepped out after him. She had chosen a navy dress, warm tights, and a camel coat, Mrs. Bell had insisted looked teacher-appropriate. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was pale but composed. Phones lifted again. Grace's stomach twisted. Vincent noticed. He did not touch her. He only moved half a step closer, placing his body between her and the worst of the cameras. A reporter shouted, Grace, did you know your fiancé was cheating? Another yelled, You, Mr. Romano, are you romantically involved with the abandoned bride? Grace froze. Vincent turned his head slowly. The reporter stepped back. Vincent's voice was quiet. Ask her one more question like that, and you will spend the afternoon explaining to your employer why their legal department needs a priest. The crowd fell silent. Grace looked at him. That was not a denial. She whispered, No, he said. Her heart stumbled. Before she could answer, a small voice called. Miss Miller. Grace turned. A little girl stood near the school steps, clutching a backpack with glittery unicorns. Her name was Lily Parker. 8 years old, too serious, always hungry on Mondays, always first to notice when someone else was sad. Grace crouched immediately. Hi, sweetheart. Lily looked at Vincent with huge eyes, then back at Grace. Are you okay? The question broke Grace more than any insult had. She smiled through it. I'm getting there. My mom said your wedding was ruined. Grace heard Vincent's men go still. Children were honest in ways adults were too cowardly to be. Grace nodded. It was a very hard day. Lily leaned closer and whispered. When my dad left, my mom cried in the bathroom. But now she sings in the car again. Grace swallowed. I am glad. Lily touched the edge of Grace's coat. Maybe you'll sing again too. Grace hugged her, over Lily's shoulder. She saw Vincent watching. His face was unreadable, but something in his eyes had shifted. Not softness. Not yet. Recognition. Maybe. The kind a man feels when he discovers something pure and does not know whether to protect it or run from it. Inside the classroom, Grace stood beneath paper stars and faced 23 children who looked at her like she was made of glass. She took a breath. I know some of you saw something sad online. Teeny nods. I want you to know something important. Sometimes people hurt us in public. Sometimes things happen that make us feel embarrassed or small. But someone else's cruelty does not decide our worth. Vincent stood outside the classroom door, listening. He had heard men beg for their lives without flinching. He had watched families lie over graves. He had negotiated with killers, thieves, senators, and traitors. But Grace Miller, standing in front of children with her heart visibly broken and her spine straight, did something he did not have a name for. It made him angry. Not at her. For her. By noon, danger found them again. Grace was helping Lily zip her coat when the fire alarm screamed. Teachers moved quickly. Children lined up. Snow fell harder outside. Vincent appeared at the classroom door before Grace could reach it. His face told her everything. Not a drill, no. She looked at the children. He lowered his voice. Get them out the west exit. Stay between me and the brick wall. Grace did not argue. That was when he knew she understood danger now. The parking lot filled with children, teachers, smoke, and confusion. Parents began arriving in panic. Fire trucks wailed in the distance. Then Grace saw him. Across the street, beneath a bare maple tree, Evan Hart stood in a dark coat. Her breath stopped. He looked thinner, pallid, desperate, and very much alive. Their eyes met. For 1 second, the world narrowed to the man who had left her at the altar. Then Evan mouthed, I'm sorry. Grace stepped forward before she could think. Vincent caught her arm. No, that's Evan. I know. He's right there, and he wants you to come to him. Grace looked again. Evan lifted one hand slightly. Something white was folded in his fingers. A note. Grace's pulse pounded. He has something. Vincent's gaze swept the street. Too many parents. Too many cars. Too many windows. A perfect place for a second attempt. Grace, he said softly. Look at me. She did. His hand was still around her arm. Firm. Not painful. Do you trust me? The honest answer was complicated. She feared him. She resented him. She did not understand him. But when bullets flew, he moved toward danger. When reporters circled, he stood between them. When her students looked scared, he did not mock her need to return. Yes, she whispered. Something flickered in his eyes. Then the shot came. Not at Grace, at Evan. He collapsed behind a parked car as parents screamed. Vincent pulled Grace down behind a stone wall, covering her with his body as chaos erupted around them. Grace screamed Evan's name. Vincent's men moved like shadows through snow. Another shot cracked from a rooftop. Vincent flinched. Grace felt it. A sharp breath. His shoulder jerked. Blood darkened the black fabric of his coat. Vincent, Ime. You reshot, I said. I'm fine. You are the most impossible man alive. Currently, he said, grimacing. That is the goal. Even bleeding. He scanned the rooftops, issued orders, and kept his body between Grace and the street. The children were rushed inside. Police arrived too late, as they often did in stories involving men like Vincent Romano. Evan survived. Barely. They took him to a private hospital owned by people who knew better than to ask Vincent questions. Grace demanded to go. Vincent refused. She went anyway. He was receiving stitches in a private room when she walked in. Shirt off, shoulder bandaged, tattoos curved over his chest and ribs. Black ink over old scars. Grace stopped at the doorway despite herself. Vincent looked up. His eyes narrowed. You were told to stay in the waiting room. You were told to stop getting shot. I was not told that. I'm telling you now. The doctor wisely looked at the floor. Vincent's mouth twitched. Noted. Grace moved closer. Anger shaking through her. You could have died. I have been closer. That is not comforting. It was not meant to be. She stopped beside the bed. For the first time, the sight of his blood unsettled her more than the danger around her. Vincent Romano seemed like the kind of man death should ask permission to approach. Seeing him wounded made the world feel less stable. His gaze followed her face. Do not look at me like that. Like what? Like you care. Grace looked away. Too late. The silence between them filled with everything neither was ready to say. The doctor finished and left. Vincent reached for his shirt, but the motion pulled at his stitches. Grace stepped forward instinctively and caught the fabric. Let me. He froze. Her fingers brushed his chest. Heat moved under her skin. She helped him slide one arm into the shirt, then the other. He watched her the entire time. Too closely. Too quietly. When she reached for the buttons, he caught her wrist. Grace. Her name sounded different in his mouth now. Not like an order, like a warning to himself. She looked up. He was inches away. The room smelled of antiseptic and snow-wet wool. Beyond the glass, men guarded the hallway. Somewhere nearby, Evan Hart lay unconscious with a bullet wound and secrets Grace was terrified to know. Vincent's thumb moved once over the inside of her wrist. A barely there touch. Her breath caught. Then he released her and turned his face away. You should not be near me. Grace stepped back, wounded by the coldness. Because I'm in danger. No. Then why? His jaw tightened. Because I am. That night, Evan woke. Grace stood behind the observation glass while Vincent entered the hospital room alone. Evan looked terrified when he saw him. Good. Grace thought, then startled at herself. Vincent pulled a chair beside the bed and sat. You ran from your wedding, he said. Evan's voice was weak. I had no choice. Men say that when they dislike the cost of honesty, I was trying to protect her. Vincent leaned back. From the woman you impregnated, Evan closed his eyes. Grace flinched behind the glass, even knowing it. Hearing it was another blade. Evan whispered. Tessa isn't pregnant. Vincent went still. Grace did too. What did you say? She lied. They told her to say it. They needed Grace devastated. Publicly destroyed. Isolated. Vincent's eyes hardened. Who is they? Evan swallowed. The Vascari family. Vincent's hand rested calmly on the arm of the chair. Only Grace could see the danger in that calm now. Why? Because Grace is the last Belandi heir. If she married me, I could sign as her spouse after the vows, claim power of attorney through the documents they prepared, and transfer the trust before anyone challenged it. Grace gripped the edge of the glass. Vincent's voice stayed level. And then Evan began to cry. They were going to kill her. The world dropped from beneath Grace. Vincent did not move. Say that again? Evan shook his head. I didn't know at first. I swear. I thought it was money. They told me Grace would never know. That she didn't need a fortune tied to criminals. Then Tessa found out they planned to make it look like Grace ran away after the humiliation. A suicide. An accident. I don't know. I panicked. So you ran with Tessa? She was supposed to lead me to the people holding my son. Grace went still. His son. Vincent's gaze sharpened. What son? Evan's face twisted. I have a little boy. Noah. He's 5. From before Grace. I didn't tell her. I was ashamed. His mother died. My aunt has been raising him in Maine. The Viscari took him 2 days before the wedding. Grace covered her mouth. A secret child. A hidden heir. A groom who had betrayed her. Then become a pawn in someone else's cruelty. Her pain did not vanish. It changed shape. Vincent stood slowly. You let Grace walk into that church, knowing men might kill her. Evan sobbed. I thought if I ran, the ceremony wouldn't finish. I thought she'd be safe. You sent the photo. They made me. They said if she left quietly, their shooter might miss the chance. I had to keep her there. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Grace couldn't listen anymore. She pushed through the door. Both men turned. Evan's face collapsed. Grace. She stood at the foot of the hospital bed. For a moment. She saw the man who once made her coffee. The man who helped laminate classroom posters. The man who kissed her hand after proposing under cheap Christmas lights because he said expensive restaurants made him nervous. Then she saw him in a car with Tessa, leaving her to be laughed at, leaving her to be hunted. I would have helped you, Grace whispered. Even cried harder. If you had told me about your son, I would have helped you. I know. That is what makes this unforgivable. Vincent watched her. There was no triumph in her face. No revenge. Only grief with a spine. Grace stepped closer. Where is Noah? Evan shook his head. They moved him. I don't know where. Vincent said. I do. Grace turned. How Vincent's expression was dark. Because the man who shot Evan was not trying to kill him. Grace's blood chilled. What was he doing, keeping him quiet? Until Viscari could make another trade. Vincent looked at Evan. Grace for the boy. The Viscari invitation arrived at midnight. Not on paper. On a video. A little boy sat on a bed in a room with green wallpaper and no windows. He clutched a stuffed dinosaur. His eyes were red from crying. But he was trying very hard to be brave. A man's voice spoke off camera. Miss Miller. Your groom was sentimental enough to ruin our first arrangement. Let us hope you are more practical. Come to the old Belandi church by dawn. No police. No priest. No Romano army. Or the child pays for your inheritance. The video ended. Grace watched it once. Then again. Then she turned to Vincent. I'm going. No. The answer came so fast she almost smiled. Almost. A child is going to die because of me. No. A child is being used because of them. That distinction won't comfort him. Vincent stood near the window. City lights behind him. His wounded shoulder was stiff. But his face gave nothing away. You walk into that church. They take you, then come with me. They said no army. I didn't say bring an army. His eyes narrowed. You are suggesting I walk into a Viscari trap with you alone. I'm suggesting you stop pretending you weren't already planning to. Silence. Mrs. Bell. Standing in the doorway. Looked from one to the other and wisely left. Vincent stepped closer. You do not know what men like that do. Grace held his gaze. I know what men like that count on. They count on everyone being too afraid to choose someone else. His expression changed. That hit something. Something old. He looked away. Grace lowered her voice. You said you were saving my life. Help me save his... Vincent's jaw worked. You are asking me to risk a war. No, Grace said. I think the war already started when they shot through a church window. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he moved toward her. Grace's breath caught as he stopped inches away. If you come with me, he said, voice low. You obey every word. You do not run toward crying. You do not argue with gunfire. You do not trade yourself because guilt feels noble. Grace swallowed. And you, his eyes held hers. I do what I do best, which is make men regret touching what I protect. Something dangerous unfolded in her chest. She should have hated the possessiveness. Part of her did. Another part, the part that had sat alone on altar steps, while strangers laughed, wanted to lean into it, until the whole world went quiet. Instead, she whispered, I am not a thing. Vincent. His gaze dropped to her lips, then returned to her eyes. No, he said. You are becoming my weakness. The confession landed like a match in a dark room. Then he turned away before either of them could burn. The old Belandi church stood on the edge of the harbor, abandoned for nearly 30 years. Snow swept across broken stone steps. The stained glass windows were boarded over. A rusted cross leaned crooked above the entrance. Black water crashed against the rocks below. Vincent drove himself. No convoy. No visible guards. Grace sat beside him, wearing dark clothes beneath a long coat. Her hair pinned back. Her hands steady only because she kept them folded. You're not alone, Vincent said without looking at her. She glanced at him. You read minds now, I read fear. I'm not afraid. You are terrified. She exhaled. Fine. I'm terrified. Good. How is that good fear keeps honest people alive? Grace looked out at the church. What keeps men like you alive? Vincent parked. For a moment. He did not answer. Then he said, not being honest. They entered through the front doors. Inside, the abandoned church smelled of salt, dust, and old smoke. Moonlight fell through cracks in the boarded windows. Broken pews lined the aisle. Candles burned near the altar. Too new and too deliberate. Noah sat tied to a chair beneath the ruined crucifix. Grace's heart clenched. The little boy looked up. Miss Grace. She froze. You know me, my dad showed me pictures. He said you were nice. Grace's eyes burned. Before she could move, men stepped from the shadows. 6 of them, then 8, then more. At the altar stood Carlo Viscari, a silver-haired man in a beautiful coat with the dead eyes of someone who had mistaken wealth for God. Beside him stood Tessa. Grace stopped breathing. Tessa looked immaculate. Blonde hair pinned. Red mouth perfect. No pregnancy. No shame. Grace, she said softly. Grace stared at her. You let me cry in that dress. Tessa's eyes flickered. I'm sorry. No, Grace said. You're not? Carlos smiled, touching. But we have business. Vincent's hand remained near his coat. Relaxed. Carlo. To Romano. Carlo's smile widened. I admit, I did not expect you to become emotionally involved. The abandoned bride is charming in a wounded little way, but hardly worth bleeding over. Vincent's face did not change, but the air did. Grace felt it. So did every man in the church? Carlo held up a folder. The Belandi Trust requires Grace's signature now that the wedding failed. Once she signs, the money moves to accounts of my choosing. The boy lives. Miss Miller returns to her charming classroom. Everyone survives the morning. And if I don't sign, Grace asked. Carlo looked amused. Then you learn how expensive kindness can be. Noah whimpered. Grace forced herself not to move. Vincent's voice was calm. You are making a mistake. Carlo laughed. You came alone. No. Carlo's smile faded slightly. Vincent looked toward the broken balcony. I came without mercy. The first shot shattered a candle beside Carlo's hand. Chaos erupted. Vincent moved instantly, grabbing Grace and pulling her behind a stone column as gunfire exploded through the old church. Men shouted. Glass rained from a high window. Somewhere above, Vincent's hidden men returned fire from the choir loft and side entrances. Grace's ears rang. Noah screamed. She saw him through the smoke, still tied beneath the altar. Vincent was pinned behind the column with her, firing with terrifying precision. Grace grabbed his sleeve. Noah, stay down. He's in the middle, Grace. She did not wait. She ran. Vincent shouted her name, and the sound of it tore through the church like something breaking out of him. Grace kept low, heart slamming. Wedding day terror transforming into something sharper. She reached Noah, fingers fumbling at the rope. It's okay, she whispered. I'm a teacher. I'm very good with knots and scared children. Noah sobbed. Are you an angel? No. Honey, just stubborn. The rope came loose. A hand grabbed Grace's hair from behind. Tessa yanked her backward. Grace cried out as Noah scrambled away. Tessa pressed a small knife against Grace's throat. Vincent turned. Every gun in the church seemed to freeze. Tessa's perfect face cracked with panic. I didn't want this, she said, voice shaking. They promised me money. They promised me a life. Do you know what it was like standing beside you? Grace, watching everyone call you kind like kindness pays rent. Watching Evan look at you like you were home, Grace could barely breathe. You could have had your own life. Tessa laughed bitterly. Women like me don't get handed fortunes hidden in old names. I didn't know about it. That made it worse. Vincent stepped forward slowly. His gun was lowered, but his eyes were lethal. Tessa, he said. Let her go. Tessa's hand trembled. If I do, Bescati kills me. Vincent's voice dropped. If you don't, I do. Grace felt the blade press closer. She met Vincent's eyes. In that split second, she saw something she had not seen before. Fear. Not for himself. For her. Vincent Romano. The man Boston feared. Looked at Grace Miller like losing her. Would hollow him out. Grace stopped shaking. Then she slammed her heel down on Tessa's foot and drove her elbow back. Tessa screamed. Vincent moved. He caught Grace with one arm and shoved Tessa away with the other. One of his men seized Tessa before she hit the floor. Carlo Viscari ran toward the side door. Vincent raised his gun. Grace grabbed his wrist. Don't. His eyes snapped to hers. He'll come back. Then make him face what he did. Don't give him an easy ending. For one terrifying moment, she thought he would ignore her. Then he lowered the gun. His men took Carlo alive. The church fell into a ringing, smoky silence. Noah clung to Grace's coat. Sobbing, Vincent stood before her, breathing hard, blood darkening the bandage beneath his shirt where the stitches had torn. Grace reached for him. You were bleeding again. His laugh was low and humorless. You ran into gunfire for a child who was not yours. So did you? His expression stilled. Around them, men moved. Enemies were restrained. Sirens approached in the distance. But Vincent only looked at her. Snow blew through the broken windows, landing in her hair like ash. He lifted one hand as if to touch her face. Stopped. His fingers curled. Grace saw the restraint. The war inside him, the need he refused to name. She stepped closer and placed his hand against her cheek herself. His breath changed. "Grace," he whispered. She closed her eyes for half a second. "I am still angry with you. I know. You recontrolling? Yes. Dangerous. Yes. Impossible." Repeatedly noted. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Then his thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. "I thought I lost you," he said. The words were quiet. Raw. More intimate than a kiss. Grace looked at him. "You don't get to lose me," she whispered. "When you haven't even admitted you want me." His eyes darkened. The sirens grew louder. Vincent leaned closer. But before his mouth reached hers, Father Callahan's voice echoed from the entrance. "Grace," the moment broke. Her parents rushed in behind the police and Vincent's men. Her mother pulled Grace into her arms. Her father hugged Noah too, because he was that kind of man. Vincent stepped back into shadow. Grace noticed. She always noticed now. 2 weeks later, the truth came out in pieces. Carlo Viscari had orchestrated the wedding plot after discovering Grace's identity through a corrupt probate attorney. Evan Hart had agreed to a financial scheme before realizing the full plan included murder. Tessa had helped forge documents, stage the affair photo, and pretended pregnancy to deepen Grace's public humiliation. Evan's son had been kidnapped to force obedience. None of it erased what Evan had done. Grace visited him once after he was arrested. He sat behind glass in a county detention center, face bruised, eyes empty. "I loved you," he said. Grace believed him. In the saddest way. Maybe he had loved her, just not enough to be brave before betrayal became unavoidable. "No," she said gently. "You loved who you became when I forgave you." He cried then. Grace did not. That part of her had changed. Outside, Vincent waited beside a black SUV in the snow. "You did not have to come," Grace said. "Yes, I did." She looked at him. "Because I'm in danger? No. Because of the trust? No. Then why?" He opened the car door. "Because I dislike the way you look after speaking to him." Grace's heart gave a strange ache. That almost sounded emotional. Vincent looked at her. "Do not spread rumors." She smiled before she could stop herself. His gaze dropped to it. The smile faded under the intensity in his eyes. Since the church, something had changed between them. Not resolved. Not easy. Changed. Vincent still kept his distance in ways that frustrated her. He escorted her to legal meetings, school board hearings, and police interviews. He stood outside her apartment in the rain one night because a strange car had parked across the street for too long. He sent security to the school but instructed them to dress like maintenance workers so the children would not be frightened. He bought the building beside her apartment through 3 shell companies and pretended she would not find out. When she confronted him, he said, "The landlord was negligent. You bought an entire building because the hallway light flickered. It flickered twice." "Vincent, I have standards." But every time Grace stepped too close emotionally, he withdrew. It hurt more than she wanted to admit. One evening, she found him in the penthouse library staring at an old photograph from the envelope. Elena Belandi, Grace's birth mother, beautiful, dark-haired, smiling with sadness in her eyes. A younger woman stood beside her. Vincent's mother. Grace entered quietly. "You lied." Vincent did not turn. "Yes, you knew my birth mother." "My mother did." Grace moved beside him. The city glittered beyond the windows. "Tell me." His silence lasted so long she thought he might refuse. Then he said, "My mother was supposed to hide Elena after the massacre. She failed." Grace absorbed that. Vincent's voice remained controlled, but she heard the old wound beneath it. Elena gave you to Father Callahan before Viscari's men found her. My mother spent the rest of her life looking for the child. For you, she never found you. Before she died, she made me promise that if the Belandi name ever resurfaced, I would finish what she could not. Grace's throat tightened. That's why you came to the wedding. Yes. And after, he looked at her then. After was not duty. The room went still. Grace's pulse moved in her throat. Vincent set the photograph down. I have survived because I do not want things I cannot control. I'm not a thing. No, he said, stepping closer. You are worse. End. Her breath caught. His eyes held hers with unbearable intensity. You stand in front of children with a broken heart and teach them dignity. You run toward a kidnapped boy because you cannot leave him scared. You look at me like you see the man beneath the monster. And I do not know whether to thank you or resent you for it. Grace whispered. Maybe both. His hand rose. This time, he touched her, fingers along her jaw. Slow, careful, almost reverent. I am not gentle, he said. I know. I have enemies. I noticed. I will want too much. Grace's eyes burned. For once in my life, she said, I would like someone to want me without being ashamed of it. Something broke in his face. Not control. Denial. Vincent leaned down and kissed her. It was not soft at first. It was restrained too long. Held back too fiercely. And when it finally happened, the kiss carried every almost touch. Every interrupted breath. Every moment he had stood between her and the world while pretending it was only strategy. Grace gripped his shirt. He pulled back first, breathing against her mouth. Tell me to stop. She opened her eyes. No. His hand tightened at her waist. Grace. I said no. This time when he kissed her, it was slower, more dangerous. Like a vow spoken in a language neither of them fully trusted yet. The final hearing for the Belandi Trust took place in a private Boston courthouse under heavy security. Grace did not want the money. That confused everyone except Vincent. You could disappear, the attorney told her. Buy homes. Travel. Live protected. Grace looked at the documents. Then at Noah, sitting beside Evan's aunt with his stuffed dinosaur. Then at her parents. Then at Vincent, standing in the back of the room like a shadow that had learned devotion. I don't want a fortune built from blood to become another reason people bleed. The room quieted. Grace signed the papers creating the Belandi Foundation for Children of Witnesses, runaways, and families harmed by organized crime. Vincent watched her signature dry. Afterward, in the courthouse hallway, reporters shouted questions. This time, Grace did not flinch. Vincent stood beside her, close but not touching. A reporter called, Miss Miller. Are you and Vincent Romano engaged? Grace froze. Vincent turned to her. One eyebrow lifted slightly. There, in the middle of cameras and guards and marble floors. Grace remembered the altar steps, the laughter, the humiliation, the way strangers had taken her lowest moment and turned it into entertainment. She also remembered Vincent sitting beside her when everyone else watched from a distance. Grace faced the cameras. No, she said. Vincent's expression did not change, but she felt the stillness in him. Then Grace added, if Mr. Romano ever wants to marry me, he'll have to ask properly, and I'll take my time answering. For one stunned second, nobody spoke. Then Vincent Romano laughed. Not loudly, not freely, but enough. Grace looked at him, surprised. His eyes warmed in a way that belonged only to her. That sounds fair, he said. 3 months later. St. Aurelius Cathedral reopened after repairs. Not for a wedding, for a charity concert funded by the Belandi Foundation. The broken stained glass had been replaced. The bullet-scarred wood had been polished, but not hidden entirely. Grace requested that one mark near the altar remain visible. Why? Vincent asked. Because healing doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. He said nothing. But later she saw him touch the scarred wood with 2 fingers. That night, the cathedral glowed with candlelight. Children from Hawthorne Academy sang on the steps where Grace had once sat crying. Lily Parker stood in the front row, singing slightly off-key and proudly. Noah sat beside Grace's parents, holding a program and waving at Grace whenever she looked over. Grace wore a deep green dress that fit her body beautifully. Not hiding, not apologizing. Her curls fell over one shoulder. Around her neck was a small pendant containing a photograph of Elena Belandi and the woman who raised her. Both mothers. Both truths. Vincent arrived late. Of course he did. But when he entered the cathedral, the entire room felt it. Men turned. Women whispered. Cameras lifted. Grace stood near the altar and watched him walk down the aisle. This time, there was no abandoned groom, no laughter, no blood in the windows. Only Vincent Romano moving toward her with the same dangerous calm as before. But his eyes were different. Still dark, still intense, yet no longer empty. He stopped in front of her. You relate, Grace whispered. I was arranging something. That sounds suspicious. It is. The children finished singing. Applause filled the cathedral. Then Vincent turned toward Father Callahan. Do not close the evening yet. Grace's breath caught. A ripple moved through the room. Vincent faced her again. Then, in front of everyone who had once watched her humiliation, the most feared man in Boston lowered himself to one knee. The cathedral went silent. Grace covered her mouth. Vincent took out a ring. Not huge. Not theatrical. Vintage. Elegant. An old Belandi emerald reset in a simple gold band. I once sat beside you on these steps because I thought I was saving your life, he said. I was wrong. Grace's eyes filled. Vincent's voice lowered. But everyone heard him. You saved mine. Not because you made me gentle. Not because you made me less dangerous. But because you taught me what my danger was for. A tear slipped down her cheek. Vincent looked up at her, like the whole violent world had narrowed to one woman. I will not promise you peace. Men like me do not get to make clean promises. But I will promise truth, protection, loyalty. I will stand beside you in every church, every storm, every room where someone mistakes your kindness for weakness. And if you choose me, Grace Miller, I will spend the rest of my life proving that the worst day of yours was the day I was lucky enough to find you. Grace could not breathe. Behind her, her mother sobbed. Her father cleared his throat and failed to hide it. Lily whispered loudly. Sigh, yes. Miss Miller. Soft laughter moved through the cathedral. Grace looked down at Vincent. The man who terrified criminals. The man who bought buildings over flickering lights. The man who said no too often. Protected too fiercely. Kissed, like restraint, was a war. And loved, like devotion, had teeth. She let the silence stretch. His eyes narrowed. Grace. She smiled through tears. You said I could take my time. His mouth curved. Cruel woman. Yes. She whispered. I learned from the best. Then she held out her hand. Yes. Applause erupted. Vincent slid the ring onto her finger. Rose. And pulled her into his arms. He did not kiss her gently. Not in front of Boston. Not in front of the people who had watched her break. He kissed her like a vow. Like a warning. Like a man telling the whole city that the woman they once recorded crying now stood protected, chosen, and adored. Outside, snow began to fall over the cathedral steps. Black SUVs waited along the curb, their windows reflecting candlelight. Inside, Grace rested her forehead against Vincent S. Do you know what my students will say tomorrow? That I am handsome, that you are dramatic? They are not wrong. She laughed softly. Vincent touched her cheek, his thumb brushing away the last tear. No pity. Never pity. Only recognition. Only hunger. Only the terrifying, beautiful weight of being seen by a man who did not love safely, but loved completely. Grace looked past him at the altar steps where her old life had ended, then back at Vincent, where the dangerous new one waited. And for the first time since the church bells rang on the worst morning of her life, Grace Miller did not hear laughter. She heard music. She heard children singing. She heard snow touching glass. She heard Vincent Romano whisper against her temple. So quietly only she could hear, "No one leaves you at the altar again." Grace closed her eyes. "No," she whispered. His arms tightened around her. No one would dare. And beneath the candlelit ceiling of Street Aurelia's Cathedral, the abandoned bride finally became something no one in that room would ever forget. Not a scandal. Not a victim. Not a woman left behind. She became the one person powerful enough to make a mafia boss kneel, and dangerous enough to make him stay.